York's Equal Pay campaign, we're pushing for stronger policies, greater transparency, and tangible steps toward pay equity. Together, we have already pushed important policy change. Now in New York, we have state and city salary history bans. We have changed the standard of equal pay for equal work to equal pay for substantially similar work. And of course, one of the topics of today, we have a state and city salary range disclosure law that we'll be talking about. I want to thank, before we get started, I want to thank our key partners in this work and sponsors of today's event: Legal Momentum, NELA New York, CWA Local 1180, and Community Service Society. For too long, women, especially women of color, LGBTQ individuals, working moms, have been denied the wages they deserve. They're passed over often for promotions, pushed into low-paying jobs. And this results in the pay gap, which we talk about on Equal Pay Days every year. It doesn't just impact that person. It impacts their families, our communities, and the economy at large. So it's a critical issue for us to deal with. Together, we have made progress, but New York women still earn only 87 cents to $1 that every male earns. And for women of color, the gap is hugely different. So more needs to be done to break down this hold that wage discrimination has on our society. That's why we're having this webinar today, because I am very excited to report that so much is happening in New York around this issue that today we have to have two panels talk about two different approaches to addressing wage inequality. Our first panel will discuss expanding and strengthening New York salary disclosure laws. And the second panel will talk about something very new for New York City, and that is two bills that would engage large private sector employers as part of the fight against wage inequality by requiring them to analyze their equal pay data. So we have a packed agenda. Let's get to it. Just a little housekeeping. Bios for our speakers will be in the chat. If you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to questions. There will be a Q&A at the end of the panel, and we, as I said, we'll try to get to your questions. If not, we'll be back to you with answers. There are resource sheets that'll be put into the chat that you can look at that have a lot more information on these topics. So I'm very excited to bring on our moderator for the first panel, and that's Miriam Clark of NELA New York and one of the really key members of our Equal Pay campaign. Thank you, Miriam. I'm passing the mic to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today and moderating the first panel, which focuses on two bills that will expand pay transparency, one in New York State and one in New York City. The New York State bill is S5990A5906, and its sponsors are Senator Jessica Ramos in the Senate and Assemblymember Alex Boras. We are so excited to have both Senator Ramos and Assemblymember Boras here to talk about this bill. The city bill is sponsored by Council Majority Whip Selvina Brooks Powers. It is 808A, and we're also delighted to have Council Member Brooks Powers here today as well. Their bios are in the chat. Helping us analyze these bills will be Seher Khawaja, the Director of Economic Justice at Legal Momentum. And Seher, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of these two bills and tell us why they're so important?
Miriam, yes, I am more than happy to talk about these two bills. So first, I just want to start by recognizing Majority Whip Brooks Powers, Senator Ramos, Assemblymember Boris, for your leadership on this and your real commitment to this issue, which is it's such an important one, not just for New York City and New York State, but across the country. And I'm going to go through the specifics of what these bills do, but before I do that, I want to take a minute to really give people a sense of why these bills overall are so important, not just towards closing the racial and gender pay gaps, but really in shifting the balance of power for workers overall. So a number of us here today, and many who are not here, put a lot of work into enacting New York City and New York State's existing pay transparency law. And it can be easy to overlook how far we came in just a few years. Prior to the passage of those laws, we lived in a system where, for the most part, employers in the private sector did not have to disclose anything publicly about pay. Not only were workers completely in the dark about whether pay practices were fair or not, most employers had no incentive to even think about their pay scales, establish fair pay scales, or to correct problematic pay disparities, because generally no one was ever going to know about them. That changed overnight based on our initial laws in New York City and New York State that now require employers to disclose pay ranges in job postings. Mandating this type of disclosure creates a baseline of accountability that was never there before. But we have more to do to achieve some of the things we couldn't push through originally and to close the loopholes in our law. So I'm going to turn to what these new bills do and why. So first and foremost, both the city and state bills would require employers to disclose to current employees upon hire and upon request the current range of compensation, including base and other forms of monetary and non-monetary compensation for the employee's current job title. And the state bill goes a little farther, but this amendment is essential for pay equity. Currently, our state Equal Pay Act, which Bev mentioned, mandates equal pay for substantially similar work based on gender, race, and other protected characteristics. This law cannot function as intended if workers are denied access to basic comparative information about compensation from their employer. Yet currently, workers have no way of accessing this information, and when they ask, they're typically denied in a way that immunizes their employers and makes it impossible for them to verify a pay disparity. We anticipate that once employers have to disclose this information, they will be more proactive in identifying and correcting problematic disparities and ensuring that the disparities that do exist are justified. Both the New York City and New York State bills will also advance broader transparency by requiring disclosure of non-salary or non-wage compensation, including bonuses, stocks, bonds, options, and equity or ownership. Because the gender pay gap is driven not just by gaps in base wages, but in sizable gaps in bonuses and other forms of discretionary compensation, it's essential that workers have basic information about the types of compensation offered for a particular position. And that's what these laws are going to do, or these bills are going to do. Third, both the New York City and New York State bills will mandate disclosure of general information about core benefits, including health insurance benefits, paid time off, paid disability insurance, and paid family leave. The state bill will also require employers to provide more detailed health benefit plan information to an offeree within 5 business days of making an offer of employment, including information regarding coverage of prenatal and reproductive health care. The lack of employer transparency around benefits offered for a position, including paid family leave, can contribute significantly to the motherhood penalty, which is a leading cause of the gender pay gap. When workers have access to this information, they can actually make informed decisions when taking on a new role. Fourth, both the New York City and New York State bills require employers to include a job description. The New York State bill currently requires employers to provide it if one exists, but it will be across the board going forward if we can get these bills across the line. Job descriptions are a critical piece to pay transparency and to fair pay practices because they provide essential context to explain a salary range, and they give workers key information about what a job entails in order to assess a salary that's being offered. Lastly, both bills include provision to close a number of notable loopholes. Under our current law, we have seen a variety of instances in which employers have tried to circumvent compliance. For example, employers have tried to recruit without a job posting to avoid including a salary range. Others have included overbroad salary ranges with the intention of obscuring the true range for the position, while others have ultimately paid candidates outside the posted range, claiming they had legitimate grounds to change after the fact. These practices essentially undermine transparency, and they thwart enforcement. To address the loopholes, the bills require employers to maintain records if they pay outside the advertised range, and require disclosure of information regardless of whether an employer issues a job advertisement. The bill will also provide more context to the definition of range of compensation. It's kind of a term in the laws to encourage more accurate and objective ranges. So that provides kind of a snapshot of some of the key provisions in the bills.
Thank you, Seher. I know you worked hard on this bill for a long time, as have many others. All right, Senator Ramos, turning to you. You led the state effort on the original salary transparency bill. Can you tell us why it's important now to be expanding those rights?
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you, Seher, for that great explanation of the bill. Truly, Legal Momentum, NELA, and PowHer, and even CWA Local 1180, you guys have all been at the forefront of this new fight, this new feminism, if we will, of making sure that our laws really empower people to have all the information they need to make the best possible employment decisions and hopefully encourage employers to be good employers and forthcoming with this information. We were very lucky to have worked so hard and have been able to pass the salary transparency bill that called for a pay range to be disclosed by the employer in every job posting. Well, now this is our second at bat. We're coming back with the bill to call for a greater disclosure of the benefits that will be made available upon employment at a certain workplace. And like Seher said, this really is about empowering the worker with everything they need to know so that they can negotiate the best possible salary and hopefully allow us as a society to inch closer towards pay equity and continuing our fight against pay discrimination. Now, I'm the chair of the Labor Committee, so you know that I'm a big believer in collective bargaining agreements being one of the best ways, if not the best way, to make sure that we are achieving pay equity across job titles. But knowing that not every workplace has a union, not yet anyway, we have to make sure that there are laws on the books that really protect workers and empower workers. So I'm hoping that in the few weeks that we have left in the 2025 legislative session, for those who aren't familiar, up here in Albany, June 12th will be our last day to legislate in 2025. So we have just a few more days, a few more weeks in order to get more co-sponsors. So I want to encourage everyone who is watching and listening to call their legislators, make sure they're signed on to our bill so that hopefully we can get it across the finish line by the end of this session and make it law as soon as possible so that in such a precarious time, we're actually putting more of the ball in the workers' court. So thank you, PowHer, and I apologize that I have to run because legislative session today did already officially start, so I have to run, but I'm always so thankful for all of your advocacy and all of your efforts in doing the right thing for workers. Thank you. And thank you to my colleague, Assemblyman Alex Boris, and of course, Councilwoman Sylvina Brooks Powers, who have also done tremendous work in advancing these laws through our legislature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Ramos. Okay, so Assemblymember Alex Boris is the Assembly sponsor of the same bill. And Assemblymember Boris, I mean, there are some laws that do require some benefit information to be shared with people. Why is this bill so important right now?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and NELA and Legal Momentum and PowHer and everyone for bringing us together to have this really important conversation that's building on the work that my Senate co-sponsor, Senator Ramos, as you just heard, did a few years ago, along with many people on this call, to get pay transparency through and the law of the land in New York State. But as has already been mentioned, Pay transparency, a large portion of pay are benefits. It's in some industries, I come from tech, it's stocks and options become part of it. In other industries, it's very generous health insurance or a pension or other aspects. But people think about the entire package that's being offered when they are deciding whether to apply for a job. And so this bill ensures that we don't just have partial transparency, but that we actually have full transparency. A, for the people who are applying, but B, for the people who are already at work at a company and can see the packages that are being offered for new people coming in and whether that will match with the package that they themselves are being offered. And so it empowers people to negotiate on behalf of themselves and to advocate on behalf of themselves to ensure that we don't have gaps that we know are prevalent in how much different workers are paid for whatever reason that gap might exist. And another piece of this bill, which I think is very important, but perhaps under discussed, is having the full information, especially the full insurance information, within 5 days after an offer is made. Because it's one aspect to say you'll have these benefits, you'll have some aspect, but in America, where we have a very complicated healthcare system, making sure that you can still see your doctor, making sure you can still see your treatment, making sure your family can have access to everything. Those details matter. They can't just be brushed over. And so another piece of this bill requires that everyone, once an offer is made, get the full information about the insurance and the benefits that they are signing up for so that people don't have to guess whether they're going to continue to have access to continue their care, to ensure that their family can continue their care. And I think that's a very important part of this as well. So I want to thank everyone who has helped be part of this push. I don't think I mentioned CWA 1180. Gloria, I see you there, who have been huge in helping to move this across the line. As the senator said, we only have a few days left. So it's waiting for a vote on the Senate floor. In the Assembly, it is passing through the Labor Committee tomorrow, and I hope to get it to the floor for a vote soon. The Senate is adding on June 12th, as Senator Ramos said. The Assembly is actually going until June 17th, so we have a few more days for a vote. But I would echo her call to reach out to your Assembly member, reach out to your senator, ask them to support this really critical bill so that we can build on the remarkable success that we had in pay transparency and actually give full transparency to all. And I want to, as I end here, also give a shout out to Councilmember Brooks Powers, who's pushing a wonderful bill on the city level as well that is a great complement to what we're doing at the state level. And it's been great to work this city and state partnership in order to move this forward for all workers. So really excited about where we can go from here.
Thanks so much, Assemblymember Boris. And that's a great transition to Councilmember Brooks Powers, who has been leading the charge on pay and compensation transparency in the City Council for a long time. So Councilmember Brooks Powers, tell us why this next step is so important.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both of my state colleagues for their work around this very important issue. I also want to thank my colleagues in the City Council, especially Chair Councilmember Williams, for her leadership around this issue. Thank PowHer New York, Legal Momentum, NELA New York, and CWA Local 1180 for your continued advocacy to ensure that New Yorkers are able to have greater transparency. New York City's current salary transparency law was an important first step, but we've since identified some critical gaps. Introduction of 808 builds on that foundation by requiring employers to disclose total compensation, salary bonuses, benefits, so workers know their full value, get the full package. And ensuring current employees, not just applicants, have access to compensation information. More information on job description to promote fairness for new prospective candidates. And salary ranges must be accurate and based on clear guidelines such as historical pay trends. Women, especially women of color, are still underpaid and underrepresented in low-wage jobs, and Greater transparency helps to close the wage gap and gives workers the tools to advocate for themselves. I will just share a few stats on what the disparities look like. So in 2021, women working full-time year-round earned 84 cents for every dollar earned by men. And for women of color, the disparities are even starker, with Black women earning 64 cents and Latinos earning 57 cents for every dollar earned by white non-Hispanic men. These inequities translate into substantial losses over a woman's lifetime, with full-time working women losing approximately $9,070 annually compared to men totaling $1.6 trillion per year collectively, with even larger losses for women of color. This is an issue I feel extremely passionate about as someone who worked in labor around the Fight for 15, fighting for fairer wages, transparency, fair wages, all of these areas go hand in hand. So I'm really proud to have the opportunity to champion this bill within the City Council and look forward to seeing this through.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brooks Powers. So we have some questions for the panel at large. I know Senator Ramos had to leave, but for everyone else, why is this issue so important at this moment? Just go ahead.
Okay, I see Assemblymember Boris is pointing to me, so I'll take the first go at it. So what I will say is right now it is a critical time in our nation where we see that diversity, equity, and inclusion is under attack at the federal level. And so we want to make sure we're protecting workers at the local level. I often use the example of Roe v. Wade, for example. Some folks said it's codified, there's no going back. When we started to see that there was a lot of advocacy around going back on it, in fact, and what we saw was a rollback of such a critical piece of legislation. And so here in New York, in the City Council in particular, we had to then take steps to protect New Yorkers, anticipating what was to come. And right now we're doing the same thing. We're looking to anticipate what could potentially come out of Washington to further create a cloud around what someone's full package looks like. Transparency helps to empower the individual so that they know what they're being offered. So if you have two offers for a job, you want to take the one that makes the most sense for you and your family. And so I will also say that the pandemic exposed and deepened wage inequities, especially for Black and brown women. And the upcoming budget resolution at the federal level will exacerbate these gaps. We see what they're trying to do. Families are facing high costs and inflation, and fair pay is more urgent than ever. So New York City, we have to lead by example. We have been leading by example, and our policies will continue to shape these national conversations. So we have a moral obligation, especially coming out of a woman-led city council. Now is the time to show the nation that this city council takes transparency seriously.
Thank you so much for that. And Assemblymember Boris, what does it look like at this moment on the state level?
I think that was beautifully said. I don't know what more I could add to that answer. But what I will say is that much of this bill was actually part of the first draft of the pay transparency bill and got through parts of the legislature, and then at the last second was pulled out and concern about, well, let's try it with just the salaries for a little bit, see if that's a thing that can work. And so why now? Well, because we've had a few years and we've seen not only does it work, it's even more powerful than people imagined. It allows workers to have so much more information to advocate for themselves. And so I think the reason now is, well, we held back to test out the prior system, and the prior system is even better than we imagined. It's time to double down and build upon it.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Boris. I was going to ask Seher that actually, which is, what have you at Legal Momentum seen about the effects of Bill V1, and how has that made you think that this is the time to be propounding Bill V2?
Well, I think as Assemblymember Boris indicated, a lot of the things we are advocating now are things we knew we needed then, right? I think to me, I can't state how absurd it is to have laws on the books that prohibit pay inequity, but that allow for employers to completely shield the pay information that allows you to identify whether those pay inequities exist. And we've been doing that for upwards of 60 years now, right? And so it's unacceptable. And I think we're finally at this. I think what the first version of the bill did, at the time we did that, there was, Colorado was kind of leading, and they were the one state that had that type of protection in place. It was a big deal in New York City, right? Because there's so many employers, and we didn't necessarily think we could get it passed so quickly, but we did it within a couple years in New York City and New York State. And since that has happened, just so many states, Miriam, across the country, states and localities have passed very similar progressive pay transparency laws. And so I think, as the council member said, like we have been a leader on this. We need to keep leading. And I think these bills are making a substantial difference. You talk to people and you talk to youth. It's funny, talking to young women, they almost don't realize the difference because they're coming into the job market for the first time, and they have access to pay information that, none of us ever had when we were looking for jobs, right? And it's making a huge difference in kind of the decisions that they're making and the way they're able to advocate for themselves.
I've noticed that as well. So thank you very much to Seher Khawaja, to Assemblymember Alex Boris, Senator Jessica Ramos, Council Majority Whip Salvina Brooks Powers. It's been an honor to moderate this panel, and let's go ahead and make these bills happen. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. This has been great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Miriam, for moderating that wonderful panel. There was so much information. And for those of you who are on the webinar today, you will find links to some very comprehensive one-pagers, for you to learn more about these bills, all the bills that we'll be talking about. So let's move on. Miriam, thank you. We really appreciate that you covered a lot of ground. So wonderful. Of course, thank you to Senator Ramos, Assemblymember Boris, Councilmember Brooks Powers, and our expert in residence, Seher Khawaja, for really covering that information about that particular approach to creating salary transparency. But the next panel is actually looking at a different aspect of transparency, and that is employers looking at their pay data, looking at what they pay to whom, analyzing it, and then reporting it to an entity. And in 2019, interestingly, one of the first places in the country, New York City, took the bold step by requiring evaluation of the data for the public sector employees. And Gloria Middleton, which you'll hear from in a moment, Gloria really spearheaded that effort. And CWA came out of a lawsuit that they had. So now is the time to talk about the private sector. What can the private sector do, to embrace this new approach and embrace the commitment, to pay equity? And it's interesting, New York's been a leader on many of the equal pay policies, and now we have a chance to be a leader once again. There is a global movement, not just statewide, but a global movement to require companies to look at their equal pay data. And it's law in the European Union, United Kingdom, Canada, and here in the States, in California and Illinois. And there are many different ways that we can ask the companies to evaluate data. And you'll hear in a moment for how we intend to do that here in New York City. But this is really a way to engage the private sector employers as partners in the change that needs to happen to create the equity that we all want. So I'm very proud to recognize our New York City Council member, Tiffany Caban, who is carrying a bill. It's Intro 982, and it is sponsored by you, Council member. Do you see you there? Yeah, there you go. We thank you for bringing this up. This is really kind of a new idea, and we're very excited to be able to move it forward in this session, hopefully. So tell us about the bill. Explain, what will it require of businesses?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. Like was mentioned, I'm Councilmember Tiffany Galan. My pronouns are she, her. And I just want to start by touching on something you did, in that we have to have a global analysis, especially when we are striving to reach equity, right? And this is not new in other parts of the world. And so while we might be leading in New York City in a lot of ways in these areas, we're behind major countries around the world. And so in Intro 982, that would require, and I want to flag for y'all that if you were to go onto our system registrar in this moment, you would see a version of the bill that is not going to be the final version of the bill. So I'm going to be talking about some things that you may not see reflected in the language, but will be when this passes. And I'm going to say when it passes, because we are absolutely getting this passed. And the bill would require New York City employers with over 100 employees to submit an annual pay report detailing compensation levels by gender, race, and ethnicity. And these reports would have to include data on pay gaps, bonus data, workforce demographic data across pay quartiles. And it's a bill that's designed to improve and promote transparency and compliance with equal pay laws by large private employers in New York City, right? Non-compliance of these laws would be publicized online and penalized, right? And then employers would have to use a standard online form and may submit explanatory notes to explain what discrepancies exist. And the city would have to enforce the law, share the data with our relevant agencies, and implement rules related to the law. And so by doing that, New York would become a national leader in the collection and dissemination of data on pay equity. It would be akin to what we see in some European countries like the UK, which obviously already require this information to be supplied by large companies. And they require it of large American and international companies that operate there. And I just want to put the law also in context of the moment, because I think that's important in the environment at the state and federal level. I think it's extra important to do something like this at a time when the Trump administration is threatening to dismantle the anti-discrimination protections and enforcement mechanisms associated with federal agencies, like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, for example. And so we have to bulk up the protections and the laws that really strive to achieve equity in these sectors when we know that they're certainly being threatened at the federal level.
Thank you so much for that explanation. There's a lot of information in there, and I know that the bill will be changing and improving and actually making it easier for companies to report their equal pay data. You've really had a lot of thought around that, which is exciting. I'm going to turn to Gloria. Are you there, Gloria? Let's see, put your Gloria Middleton. We're going to call on you next. There you go. Thanks, Gloria. We're going a little bit out of order. There she is with
I'm
very good.
multitasking as usual.
Absolutely. That's the name of the game. That's why you get so much done, Gloria.
Yeah.
So, well, Gloria, we have had the opportunity to do a lot of work together over the years. We've been on the steps of City Hall. We've been in hearings. We've been celebrating some really important wins for New York City, and you have been behind many of those wins. Can you tell us a little about what New York City is doing for their people, for the public sector, and then which is a great, segue to us doing this for the private sector?
Thank you, Bev, and thank you for having me. And I thank Councilwoman Caban for all that she is doing to make sure that there's we close this wage gap for women and minorities. So in I think we started in 2018, we noticed there was a large wage cap for a title that we had just accrued from the city. It was the administrative managers. When we did accrue them and we started to negotiate a contract for them, we noticed the salary range was 50,000 was the minimum, and then it went up to 150,000 as a maximum. Something is wrong with that. So we discussed stuff among ourselves, and we got an attorney to find someone who could do some research to see why that happened. And it happened basically because the title of administrative manager way back when was mostly white males. And as the civil service tests became available for women and minorities, they start passing the test, so they would not increase the minimum. So they started at the minimum while the white men proceeded to get higher levels of pay. So upon winning, we filed a lawsuit. We won. We did a settlement. And upon doing the settlement, we said, if this is happening to our titles, it must be happening to other titles in the city. So we got together with our attorneys and got with the city council. And in 2019, the New York City Council passed Local Law 18, also known as the Pay Equity Law, to identify pay disparities among municipal employees of the city of New York. We observed between race, ethnicity, gender, and other protected classes. The Pay Equity Law requires the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics to report city municipal employee pay data publicly and to provide the council with direct access to the data to facilitate the council's own statistical analysis. Since 2021, the council's legislative division and data team have issued reports analyzing the data provided pursuant to Local Law 18 and have concluded that large pay gaps between male and female workers and white and non-white workers were the result of occupational segregation. While there is essentially equal pay for all individuals regardless of gender and or race within the same civil service title, occupational segregation and pay differences between occupations lead to large gender and racial pay gaps within the municipal workforce. Building upon these findings, this report examines how racial pay gap. Building upon these findings, this report examines how segregation both across and within city agencies contributes to the pay gaps, how data on large agencies skew the data and mask pay gaps, and how the low pay of non-white female employees accounts for large portions of pay disparities within the municipal workforce. In other words, the data team found that depending on what your title was, depending on which agency you worked for, whether it was male dominated or not male dominated, there was a pay gap that helped the discrimination of how women and non-whites got paid. Although there have been some small gains in narrowing these pay gaps over time, stagnant job segregation has prevented greater progress. To address these challenges, the report recommends diversifying well-paying career tracks that are currently predominantly held by male and white workers. Through simulations, the data team did demonstrate that diversifying such titles would produce substantial reductions in the municipal workforce, gender and racial pay gaps. So they continued to develop these reports after 2021 and noticed that certain agencies, police department, the higher you go, the more white it gets. The fire department, we all know the story. There's not even enough women firefighters. Department of Transportation, the higher you go, the whiter it gets. In an agency like HRA, which is mostly headed by women, when you compare titles in HRA, Human Resource Administrator, to titles like in the Department of Transportation, the women there, even in the higher titles, were making less than the men in higher titles in other agencies. So we see the discrepancy, we see the disparity. And luckily, this is how you get information on how to change it, by making sure you have the data. Without the data, we can talk it, we live it. Some people are there, they see the discrimination, but they're not willing to talk about who did what. So having this data is so important to making sure that you make this change. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I think it's really significant that New York City is doing this for its employees as we move ahead and ask private sector employers to do a very similar thing of looking at it. So I think we have Council Member Amanda Farias has joined us. Am I right? Let's see. There you are.
I am
Great.
here. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us. So we've talked a little bit about Councilmember Caban covered the bill that would require employers, to report certain information about their equal pay data. So now I guess people must wonder, what are you going to do with that information? I mean, it is for top employers to start with, right? But what do you hope to find out, and how will we learn from that data?
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you for including me in it. And really thanks to my counterpart in the council, Councilmember Caban, for laying out the foundation of how Introduction 982 will work on the business side. I think what's powerful about this package, which is coupled with my bill Intro 984, is that it just doesn't stop at the data collection. The goal is to make the data known and then actionable. My bill Intro 984 ensures that the city doesn't just collect the information, we study it, we share it publicly, we analyze it, and then we hopefully we'll be attempting to address the longstanding disparities that we've been hearing this entire time. I think in terms of Intro 984, what it's requiring to do is have the New York City Commission on Human Rights to annually study the aggregated equal pay reports submitted by these businesses and identify the disparities in compensation based on gender, race, or ethnicity. Obviously, we know that there are huge gaps that happen throughout each of these sections of when we're looking at how to fill the pay gap or how to address it. And then what the city is going to do is produce an annual public report that includes the detailed analysis of the disparities uncovered across the sectors, a clear explanation of the methodology that was used to identify those gaps, so we know how we're doing it and how we're going to compare the data, and then concrete actionable recommendations for employers to address and reduce the pay disparities. So the report won't just sit on a shelf or a desk. It's going to be submitted to the mayor, the council speaker, made publicly available via the city's open source library, ensuring transparency and accountability. And that way, coupled with the local government being able to analyze and address the disparities that we get from the report, it's also going to help govern and be analyzed by what we have here, several stakeholders, whether it's on the labor union side or the stakeholder side of our nonprofits and our advocate side, being able to see this data publicly and be able to do more with it or hold us more accountable to addressing some of the inequality.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for carrying this bill. You've been a champion of so many issues, but with me and PowHer for a very long time. We appreciate that and appreciate you taking it to the next level. I think that's what's important with this work. How do we keep building on our progress? And if you're going to change systemic, economic oppression, it's going to take a while, right? It's going to take a lot of different strategies, and this is one, right, which is very exciting. Is it possible to have our speakers from this panel to have Councilmember Caban and Gloria also pinned? Oh, great, thank you. So just a question for the group. We have about just 5 minutes to talk, and we have a couple other questions. and some of these are from the audience, actually. How do we advance these bills? That's the first question that I see here from the audience. So I think that's the one that we should answer first, because we have to get these over, the finish line in order to, to start to implement them. So does anyone want to answer? What can people do to help make this happen? Anyone can speak.
I mean, I think Councilmember Caban and I can always use more people pushing on the speaker's office, on our colleagues, on the administration to move the bill package along. I think we are in the process of negotiating this package and making sure that it makes sense for what our agencies have to do, but also ensuring that while putting in laws in place, the business community is going to want to participate and actually give us the information we need to answer for the inequalities that we're trying to raise to the surface with a data-driven approach in terms of reporting. And I even think the bill package itself can help all of us look at how we're going to go back into our workplaces and try to change those workplace norms that are maybe not talking about salary transparency, not just the internal HR process, and really looking at the disparities of what our workplaces look like and kind of self-challenge ourselves to look at our workplaces differently.
And the only thing I would add is that the package is in the home stretch, right? Like we, partners, you all, certainly, the majority leader have put in really, really good work to get the package to where it is. And so it's a balancing of moving it while we're moving a lot of other things like our budget. But I think it means it calls for action at this point, right? Like simultaneous action of making sure that we have the resources ready to support the laws that we enact, that they're not just unfunded mandates, especially when we talk about that accountability piece, and like having part of the call be to make sure that we are funding and staffing up consumer and worker protection and the New York City Commission on Human Rights, because they all, all of that's got to come together.
Right. So I'm guessing you all, Gloria, did you want to add something to that?
Well, for me, labor rights is civil rights. So even though this is the private sector, we already went through it with the public sector, and I would reach out to my colleagues as well to support this bill, to call other councilmen to make sure that they support it and get them to vote yes.
Right. Gloria, you make a really interesting point that you're in you're in a union family, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you really have been supportive of all the things that we do in the private sector as well. Why do you step out in that way? Why is that important to you or to the cause?
Everyone who works in the public sector has a family member, a friend, a relative who works in the private sector. We are all in this together, and we can't do it alone. So we have to support each other in this fight for pay equity. I know my nieces and my nephews, when they go out to look for a job, they come back and tell me their frustrations of what happened in that interview, etc. So that gives me motivation to make sure that we fulfill this promise to the next generation, so that they don't have to go through what some of us have gone through. And as I said, as far as labor is concerned, we were part of everything that has happened to make sure that there's equity in America. So this is just part of what we do as labor. And I push my fellow unionists to be involved.
Yes.
Can I add something?
Sure. Yes, please do.
I obviously love what Gloria said. I think to kind of pull out a little bit more, like when I think about why labor is so critical to a lot of these fights, especially the ones on the private sector, is a lot less people than we think get the opportunity to transition to a unionized job. My mom was in the medical field for about 16 years before her private office that she worked for, a private medical doctor, decided to close and go work in a hospital. And she was unemployed for 3.5 years before she could end up finding a job in a hospital with $11.99. And we forget, I think, sometimes that the fight is is larger than just our own scope. A lot of people, a lot of everyday folks are trying to live and find opportunities in between all of these things. And sometimes transitions happen later in life. And so the best way that obviously we all know, joining forces together to protect everyone, but this is also about ensuring that where folks are transitioning, whether you're a young person out of college transitioning to your first job, that maybe you end up in a labor union and there's parity and you understand the movement up and down of titles and across, departments. But more times than not, we end up with people in private sector jobs that really have to push and fight to get some transparency on how they're able to best set up their futures and their lives in our city. And so, labor is so important to make sure they're even just uplifting the opportunities and the benefits on one side that we should be comparatively looking to meet on the private side as well.
Thank you so much. I wanted to invite Miriam and Seher to turn their cameras on and just be part of this closing conversation. There's a quite really interesting question someone's asking in the audience, and thank you for that. Could this legislation help close the wage gaps in frontline or historically undervalued sectors like education, care work, and nonprofit jobs? I think we all know that those are underpaid jobs. I'm just wondering if anyone thinks, I mean, is the legislation going to help move that very large ball up the mountain? Because it's very significant, these jobs and the low pay that so many women do get. Does anybody want to respond to that?
So just
Go ahead.
before anyone else does, we also cover 22 non-for-profits. So we do have private sector jobs in our union. And I can't begin to tell you what those young, because they're mostly young people, because they work in jobs that they have passion for. Talk about human rights. We cover human rights, the Human Rights Watch. The salaries they were making before they became unionized were disgusting. And the pandemic, as someone mentioned before, changed the scope of all that, because the only people who kept their jobs during the pandemic were union workers. So we had a flood of non-for-profits come in and ask for to join a union. And it has been an uphill battle, but we have won.
Thank you, Gloria.
This legislation, for those who are not unionized, and there are so many nonprofits out there that still are not unionized, whether they're small or large, this will help them be able to get a decent wage, because they were making less than $15, some of these nonprofits. So, and then we still have a big battle, because with the federal government now getting rid of the pay that they get from the federal government, it's going to be another uphill battle, because now we're going to have to face layoffs. So it means so much to these young people and adults, whoever they are, to be able to have a scale in which they can go into a job and make sure that they get paid a decent wage.
Great. Thank you. Seher?
Yeah, I would just add to what Gloria was saying. I think there's a lot employers can do in terms of keeping wages suppressed when it's all happening behind closed doors, right? I think we know they're happening, but there's so much less visibility around occupational segregation and women, particularly women of color, working these incredibly demanding, incredibly valuable jobs that are being paid so little, right? And I think if you look at both bills, what they are doing for women of color, for workers across the board, is that it's bringing visibility to what the pay is in different sectors. And then what the pay data reporting bills are going to do is that they're going to give a sense of where are people falling even within those sectors. And I think that data is going to tell us a lot, and it's going to empower people to be making different decisions, but it's also going to push employers to be changing their pay practices, and that's a really kind of a long game, but I do think we're going to see it eventually.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Seher. Miriam, do you have something you want to add? Because you're an expert in this area, and you
Well,
asked for questions, but do you want to
so
add something before we
I just
close?
I just want to add to what Seher said, which is that occupational segregation, as has been said before, is a horrible disservice not only to women of color, to everyone whose wages are suppressed, but also to the economy. And so the beginnings of transparency here, even though these just start with with salaries and benefits, once you start with transparency, you can't really close the door. And I think that's why this little bit of light is so significant. And I do believe will lead to the breach of the wall of occupational segregation that has kept so many people back.
Right. Thank you, Miriam, for that wisdom.
And Beverly, I'm sorry, could I add just very, very super briefly to what Ms. Gloria and Miriam said? I think to pull it together is the transparency and accountability piece, especially in these sectors where they are lower paid, majority, Black and brown women, is that by requiring the employers to report on this, we're giving workers, advocates, and policymakers a major tool to identifying those disparities. So it's like you take on these fights and you've got a scalpel instead of like a blunt object when you're trying to reach your equity goals. And to that point that Miriam was making is that sunlight is a really powerful disinfectant. And so when they're pressure they're required to report on this, it puts pressure to comply with these laws that they may have and fix stuff that they've been ignoring for years because they haven't had to. And then you put it in the larger universe of like what we're trying to accomplish and say, well, doing this and also, right, like doing what we can to counteract the NLRB being torn down. Like, what are we doing at the municipal level? Knowing that 90% of the private sector is ununionized. So doing this while we work to increase union drives and get more unionized workers to collectively bargain together. Doing this while and I got to make this real quick plug, doing this while we fight for one of my other bills, the Secure Jobs Act, that would end at-will employment at the city level, which is, again, something that they do in the UK and other major countries. And like the impact of these pay equity laws becomes larger when you put it in the context of like all of the other really beautiful labor fights that we're having. So that I think that's really cool.
Putting in a plug for Councilmember Brooks Powers' non-compete legislation, which we also need to have, which is also another important tool here.
Right. There are many pieces of important legislation that we are supporting, that we want to support, that still have to be introduced, right? But it's so exciting to consider that New York is looking at, this is technically 5 bills, with this matching in the Senate Assembly. It's really extraordinary moment for our cause that while things are being really pushed down on a federal level, that New York is continuing to stand strong and to protect its workers, support its workers, and move forward on equity. So I'm really so proud of the work that you all doing. Thank you so much. I want to thank Councilmember Caban, Councilmember Farias. We have our electeds who are on the previous panel, which is Senator Ramos, Councilmember Brooks Powers, and Assemblymember Boris, for really pushing forward this work. Our experts in residence, Gloria Middleton, always good to have you and hear what you have to say. Seher, thank you for that wonderful overview, and Miriam for everything that you're doing as a moderator, but really everything you're doing through your work to move this all along. I also want to thank Abby Grimshaw, who's behind the scenes, making sure that we have this tech working today, and Elsa Weisinger, who's our associate, who really made so much of this happen. So it takes a team, and it's going to take a real community, a real effort to get these bills passed, but we'll be in touch with you to share with you what you can do, to keep the volume up, to keep the drumbeat, and to make sure that our elected officials know that we're behind them and that we will support these kinds of important legislative pieces. So thank you so much. We'll follow up with lots of information, but we're signing off for today, and you'll hear from us again soon. And thank you to everyone for all this great work and